Come on.
Oh,
And
it's live.
there we go. We're live. It said 10
Long time
seconds.
no see.
Yeah.
I was just live with some of these guys not 15 minutes ago.
Right? Well, we're going to the top. Looks like we got a full house already. That's awesome.
Yeah, who all's in here?
Well, let's go on right down. We got Twisted Mopar Garage, Frank Parks again, Twisted Mopar Garage, Bear Rose Garage, Blown Budget Garage, A Cove, mostly old parts and rust, Mr. Patrick, Mopar Man 1978, mostly old parts and rust, more Patrick, A Cove, Slant Daily Garage, who let this riffraff in this chat? The Cove, Frank Parts, Blown Budget Garage, and it goes on Twisted, Patrick, Twisted, Wannabe, Twisted, and Clint, and a partridge in a pear tree, and green grass grew all around and around.
And let's not forget Colleen. I believe that's 100% of our female audience at the moment.
Did I miss Colleen in here?
Colleen just sneaked in. And there's Buff.
Oh, Colleen. Yep, there she is right there. Yep. She came in. Sorry. On my end, I just got to give you a heads up that we had weather come through. And so I have a little bit of a glitchy little thing going on here. So I apologize if I fall behind or whatever. So I apologize.
Blow Budget Garages, I'm just here to continue to annoy Wilbur. And Randall, you're doing a good job of it. Yeah, it's funny. Randall's looking everywhere for an 8 3/4. Professor P, on the other hand, he's looking for a 7 1/4. So that's the way it goes.
Wait. Someone's looking for an 8 3/4?
Yeah, Randall is.
I'm going to be taking...
Well, I mean, he's looking for one for his street car. He's fishing around for one, but you're looking for a 7 1/4 sure grip unit, which are...
That's correct. Yes, I'm looking for a 7 1/4 sure grip, and I'm taking the 8 3/4 out of my race car and putting a Ford 9-inch in it. But it's narrowed. It's got a little bit of a narrow 8 3/4, so probably wouldn't be the greatest. Plus, it's got 35 spline axles, so it'd be hard to drive that on the street with it's got a spool in it right now.
Tell you what, and some people have mixed results with spools. A lot of people, if you have a 32-inch tire on the street, the spool, spool's not a big deal.
Yeah, just I've driven on the street, just pump up the air pressure is what I've done. It goes around the corner easy, and it is what it is.
Think if it's just so loud that you never notice the tires chirping, no one cares.
Right. It's usually my problem. Took the radio out years ago. Couldn't hear it anymore. I was tone deaf at a certain tone anyways, from the Flow Dogs. Okay, so
Patrick mentions, while we're on this craziness topic, Patrick does mention something. 7 1/4 rears, they used them in pulling garden tractors. I've seen the 8 3/4 in the Cub Cadet, and I've heard of the 7 1/4 in them. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, let's go. We actually had our first one, Mr. Frank Parks. I think he's still in here. Now, I've actually taken out the air conditioning on both. My wife's car is a non-AC car. It's a dealer installed AC. And then my Green Dart has factory air. And he's saying another A-body fact that most get wrong, on non-AC cars, a heater fan motor retaining rings has one flat side Y. When factory clocked, the flat allows clearance for the slant 6 valve cover. Also, too, I did notice that on that one with the little retaining ring, because that is what holds the whole thing in. You put the clip on there, and then that's actually what holds it up in there so you can get the nut on there and screw it on. That's at least what it was for the wife's car.
I got to tell you, that's a very Frank Parks thing to know. He knows a lot of obscure Mopar facts.
Yeah.
Mopar Restos. He's in Summerville, Georgia, there in the northwest corner near Chattanooga. I have had Frank on live before. It was great. Love to do it again sometime soon.
And here's sold so many quarters around here for pulling tractors. Yeah. I never even knew that was I didn't even know that if that was a thing, pulling tractors until I moved out here, really. I didn't know that. One in Cat is asking, narrow 8 3/4 will it fit my belly?
You were opening the box with that.
You know what? It might. Now, see, I have spring work. The springs have been relocated in on my car, and I believe it's been 3 inches have been taken out on either side. What I'll do is this weekend I'm actually going to start doing car stuff again this weekend, and I'll do some measurements and I'll post them up. I'll
Now,
put them on a little a short, and I'll put them up there.
now
So
this is interesting what Frank is saying about that. He's never found a sure grip. Now, I know they were made. They're in the books. You can see them in the service manual, but I've never seen one in person. Well, I don't know, maybe one. I know they exist, but I know they're rare.
they're super rare. In fact, I've found a few people that have had them on 4A bodies only, and they sold them out before people buy them up really quick. But I think they only came in like 2 years, I believe. It was in the
Really?
'60s. Yeah.
Huh.
So, but once again, I could be wrong. I just know that it was really early version, and it was just in the racing thing.
Now, I
Oh,
know they've made 410 gears for the 7 1/4. Um, did they ever have a deeper gear for it than that anywhere?
I wouldn't know that. I just know that the 410 or 411 was the only one I've ever seen,
Hmm.
and I think that's the only one you can buy right now currently. 355 is a really common one from Dr. Diff, is it, or the Diff Doctor or something like that? And they're the ones I'm actually going to get my 355 gear for when I go and put the overdrive A500 into my slant. But it would just be nice to have a short grip or some sort of posi of something, because when I put it with 355 and then that low ratio first, it's definitely going to want to try to spin the tires with a 23-inch tall tire in the back. So
23.
it's 23. Yeah. Well,
Why even run a tire? Just the brake drum is probably.
well, because I was trying, it's a slant six. I was trying to give it everything
Yeah,
it could have. It
right.
was the smallest radials or drag radials they made. It was actually the smallest slicks they made, and so that's just what I got. I was just trying to lower the ratio down because it's 276 gear, so any little bit helps. Actually, pullers, electric fans. See if we got anything going on. You got anything other than that going on? Anything new? Any videos? Any?
Well, no, I did put up a short. As you can see, we've crossed into 2-digit territory.
I saw that.
If you've not seen that, it might get you motivated. But working on the list of deliverables, because now we're just over 3 months, and it's time to get stuff done. So just registrations are good, and we're having a good time over here. We've had some tech topics come up periodically. We just try to save them, but this 7 1/4 thing, I don't know. I think this is kind of interesting. Nobody talks about the 7 1/4 for
I
anything.
love it. It's a super efficient rear end, and for a seven
Yeah.
for a slant six, it's going to survive just fine. It'll live whatever you throw at it, because like we were talking about high point angle, it's right in the center, and so it's super efficient. But that's its weak point, and I love it. I think it's a great rear end.
Well, I've done a lot with a 7 1/4 behind the 318. If you can manage not shocking it too bad, you can do a lot with one.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. If you automatic, if you keep the stick shifts away from it and really hammering it. But here's I have this guy named I won't tell you his last name. His first name was Jeff, and back in the early 2000s, he got one of those 380 horsepower crate engines that they used to sell. Mopar sold, and he had a Valiant wagon, and I gave him some fender well headers, and it was like a 64, 65 Valiant wagon. It had 7 1/4 in it. We put that 380 horse in that thing with a 904, low ratio first and second, manual valve body, and we would take that thing out and just beat on it. And that 7 1/4 survived. Now, we didn't have slicks on it, but it survived for a long time. We knew it was going to blow when it started becoming a posi, and it stayed a posi for I
oh,
don't know.
it started becoming a posse.
It became a posi, and so then we took it down to the track, and it would just blow the tires off because it was a small bolt pattern. We just didn't have anything for slicks on it, and so we dropped the air pressure down to 20. We'd roll out of the hole, and those things, those 380 horse crate engines, man, they were making like four something at the time. For like, I think it was like 404 or 405, and 420 foot-pounds of torque. And man, it survived until the day it didn't. And the day it didn't, it just literally became a neutral.
Well,
Yeah.
so Brian has an interesting question here about the 9 1/4. Colleen's mentioned the 8 1/4 in Damien's Dart, and to me, Randall, that's the answer: is just find you an 8 1/4 and rock with it. it will do everything you need to do.
My chat's not updating, so give me a second here. Do you know
Yeah.
what time it was? Sorry.
Well, we're just at 8:08. I mean, I got mine real time.
Okay.
But so that's that. You're mentioning talking about sure grip versus open, that kind of thing. We have a guy here on YouTube in our community. We call him affectionately Professor Harbor Freight, New Guy's Garage, Dan. And he has something he calls the open diff gang, which is guys that try to use an open differential and try to maximize the open differential to make both tires spin together.
Okay.
His Mustang does that. It's an open differential. He can jack it up. He can turn one wheel. The other turns the other way. And he's worked a lot with the springs and air shocks and stuff to get the car loaded to where it will spin both.
Okay.
It will do a burnout and spin both. What are your thoughts about that? 318 wheel run, he has an open differential in his Duster that he races. Bracket car runs 12s. He'll do a burnout. It'll heat one wheel, get
Then he
enough
rolls
traction, it'll break the other free, and do a second burnout to burn out the other one.
Yep. I've
He
done
races.
that.
What are your thoughts on maximizing your open differential?
Well, I'm going to try that because that's actually before I could afford anything. That's actually how I did it. Is I would do a burnout in the water. We would get that one hot. I'd roll forward and then do a burnout on the other side, and that's actually what I did. And then I did it with air shocks too. I'd put an air shock on the passenger right side, and then also too, before I put the battery in the trunk, I would just get like 25-pound weights and then just kind of lay them up on the side there in that fender well, like drop them down into that little pocket that's right there, and I would do that, and it did work. But then once I got a posi, found one in the wrecking yard, I could stop all that, and it worked. It worked right away. But you can do it, and I could make it work. And this is a street car, so that's why I was looking for one. But I mean, it's not a be-all, end-all. It's not going to end, and it's not a game ender if I don't find it. I'll just put the 355s in it and just call it good and go with it.
And that's the nice thing about the automotive community in general. Yeah, there's a lot of things that aren't typically explored because we have sure grips and lockers and all kinds of ways to control traction. Yeah. But if you want to explore maximizing traction, you can do that. Now, not everybody will understand why you're doing it, but everybody chooses the things that we try to explore and solve and the challenges we want.
Yeah. And I've done it, and I will probably have to do it again, which is not a big deal. And it just, like I said, just is what it is. And I'll just do the exact same thing like I did before. I'll just put an air shock on that one side, and then just do like a burnout, and then roll forward, and then do another burnout. But with the 318 that's hopped up, it's a little easier because you got a lot more torque. With the slant six, it's probably going to be a little harder. I've never done it with the slant six before. If I can actually do a burnout outside the water box, we'll see if that's possible. So.
Well, it's the whole thing is a lot of people will lose track of that and think it's all just about how fast you can go for the money. That's all it is. But when you say that, when people say that, they're losing sight of all of the cool challenges that you can choose to engage in.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, I mean, I know Junkyard LS Turbo, eBay Turbo, Junkyard LS, fine, but why should we neglect all of the cool challenges that we can sort through and enjoy? Because this is a journey. It's not just about strapping yourself to a rocket, going as fast as you can and calling it good. It's a lifelong automotive journey.
Yeah. And
so run the intermediate steps. See how far you can take them.
Yeah, and that's, I'll have a spoiler alert on my page. The throttle body is a bust. It didn't really. I shouldn't say it was a bust. I mean, I got all the parts. They were just junkyard stuff that we had as fodder laying around. So I used it all. It was just the R&D stuff we had laying around, and I was expecting it to get at least better street miles and to be better than the carburetor. Now, where it was better is it was better average. That means it would, without touching it, it would do a little better as far as mileage than if the carburetor was set up. It would actually get, like 0.2 miles per gallon is the difference. At the track, the carburetor was definitely better. by a significant margin, even when it was set up. But with the fuel injection, you could just go out there and start it up and then go and run, and it was what it was. With the carburetor, you had to launch it and kind of roll into it. Actually, with the 4-barrel carburetor, you had to launch it and roll into it, and you had to like be smart about it. With the Holly, the 2-barrel, I was able just to go up there, do a burnout, you basically just mat it to the wood. So it was really the easiest one to drive, but it was actually the slowest one, and it didn't get the best mileage. It actually was about the same as far as mileage as the fuel injection throttle body, and as far as the quarter-mile times or eighth-mile times, it was about the same as the fuel injection. So, but we have this VRS carburetor here, so I'm going to put that on it. That's going to be this weekend.
You have it there in the studio?
Yeah, I got it right here.
Oh yeah, show him that. That's a work of art.
Yeah, 1 second. It's right here. Yeah, so here's the VRS.
Look at that.
Yep. This is one of the very first ones that came out. It's never been used. It was just basically kind of a samples that were sent out. And my buddy over here at Muscle Car Solutions, he's the one that gave it to me. He's like, I haven't used it yet, so see what you can do with it. So I was like, okay, I'll give it a go.
Yeah,
put it on the Slant 6. Why not?
Yeah, most middle parts of us is exactly how fast can you push a nearly stock 318? I don't know. We're going to find out. That's the thing. I mean, this is all a journey. We get to blow stuff up and try something new. And
I got to tell you one thing. I was waiting for this live event to announce something. Someone told me a little while back that they have this thing called 318 Fest. Is that true?
I went to the 318 Fest in May at Jake's Dragway in Alabama.
Uh-huh.
And from what I understand, they run an event in May and October. It's at Jake's Dragway it's near Coleman, Alabama, in the northern part, central north.
Nope. You're
Northern parts. My buffering?
Yep, you're buffering. Go back to it was in, and then you buffered.
It's in northern central Alabama. Had maybe 100 cars there. It was a fun event. It was at a little outlaw track called Jake's Dragway. Okay. There was probably more racing going on in the back of the pits than there was on the track, but it was a fun little event, and they had an award for the fastest 318, which I thought was cool.
I'm interested in that because I got a whole bunch of 318s out here that I just was given,
and the only rule you had to have 318 cast on the block. So the rules were really loose. It was something that ran mid-sevens that won it when I was there. So there's a lot of room to lower that.
Yeah, I'm actually going to run a 318 with a forged crank, with the rods. Maybe a little better pistons, but it will be it's going to be I think it's a 30 over 318, which comes out to like what
323.
323 exactly. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. Is I'm not going to stroke it. I'm not going to do anything. I've got a few of them. I got a Magnum out there, and I've got something else. And I'm gonna go for it. Why not? I got some stuff. I got some heads I can throw on it, but I'm going to try to do it with a 318. And after we do this run at the No Name Nationals, I'll just put the 318 right in the Cookie Monster.
Why not?
Yeah, why not? It's set up for it. So
that's something I all the time try to. It's something you kind of figure out as you get older. Is that it's not about just a destination of where you want a car to be. It's a journey that you get to enjoy along the way.
Yeah.
So you can take out what you build for No Name Nationals, then put a 318 in it, and then do something else.
Yeah, and I'm already gonna have the nitrous in there, so spread the crap out of it.
Aaron Germanson wants to run a 318 at Bonneville and go 200. It could be done.
Yeah, right here. Yeah, he can.
Like a poly block? Because that's 130 over. Early 318s bored to a stock 340.
You can. That's right. Yeah, the poly blocks, you can do that.
Poly block is really thick.
Here's a twisted. I'm around 525 with my Junkyard Magnum 318. Now we need more boost. He was beating on that thing. That's right. That's Patrick. That was a 318 in that thing, huh? The last No Name Nationals, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, now, Patrick, he's talking about would it qualify. I don't know what's cast on your block. They're talking about just production blocks, but the most I've seen in a factory mope, I've seen 457. No, I've seen 462 inches from a
Yeah.
small block Mopar. That's the
Yeah.
most I've seen. I theoretically figured out one time how you could get to 476. I'm sure if somebody wanted to get stupid enough, they could go to 500 with spindly rod journals or whatever. But I don't know what that would do. What's the most cubes you've ever seen, Professor P, from factory block or
A
even
factory
aftermarket small
block.
block?
Well, I believe it was the 454 with a 4125 stroke,
Yeah,
and it
the
was
kryptonite crank.
yeah, and it was a 4100 bore. But it was a 318 block, but it's basically what Patrick is saying here. It was a 318 block, but it was like an X block, but it said 318 on it, and it was a 4100 bore, and I believe it was a 4125 stroke. That's the biggest I've ever seen. As far as like an X block, as far as a factory block, I saw a 60 over 318 with a 4125 stroke. It didn't. That was in San Diego, but it didn't really rev much. It was more of a driver.
Recognize Deke there. Deke is the AHRA tech official who'll be teching in cars to No Name Nationals. Good guy, smart guy. And he used to put Belleville washers behind the differential side gears on 7 1/4s. It was a Baird assemble and it wasn't a spool, but it beat the heck out of a peg leg. Cant was defeated in the Battle of Try.
Right? That's actually a good idea because I was thinking about trying to shim them up somehow, just to put like shims behind it, or I've got a few out there I can play with. And in fact, I drive it so much that I've overheated and cooked the fluid in the thing so much because it takes less than a quart of
Right.
the back cover, and I was going to make a sump in the back of it, so it still had the curve on it, but then it had a sump behind it, so that way it could hold an extra half a quart or something, just so I could get some more fluid in the damn thing. I changed the fluid in that thing every oil change. I changed the rear end fluid in mine, and I started putting that 75 140 in it. That Valvoline is Valvoline, yeah, the Valvoline synthetic. And I don't see any power, but it's just, it is an old rear end. It's from the 78, and I put new bearings in the back of it. But when I took the cover off of it at the wrecking yard, there was some parts and pieces in it, and I was like, well, I hope that's from the wheel bearings. I bought it anyways. I've put probably 30,000 miles. Well, no, actually, probably more like 50,000 miles on it since I put that in there. But I just keep changing the fluid, and every time I change the fluid, there's stuff in there. So we'll see how long it goes.
So there's one topic we'll get to eventually tonight. Professor P has sent along. We'll talk about measuring bearing clearances, plastic gauge versus miking bores, etc. If you want to save that for just a little deeper into the show, because there's actually some pretty good topics going on right now.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'll figure.
There's one here I kind of like that Blown Budget Garage has put up. Thoughts on, and it's a big open-ended one, 904 versus 727. I'll just say John Cope jokingly calls me the 904 king because I am all about those things.
Me too.
But Professor P, what say you?
I'm a 904 fanatic also. I've had a 727. Here's the thing. I've had a 727 in the Cookie Monster, and I literally took the 727 out. I had all the trick stuff in it. I had the bearing, the fully rollerized back, everything that you could do to a 727. Yeah, right?
With a 904 like that, you don't want a 727.
Yeah, and so then I took that out and I put a 904 in it, and it was completely stock. I just did some of the the welding tricks on it behind that car, and it was running low sixes, and I picked up 2.5 tenths just in the 8th mile by going from one tranny to the next, and ever since then I was sold. I was just sold. I was like, yeah, the 904 is the way to go. Plus, there's so much more room around it, and it's just a smaller transmission, and it cools down faster. That's another key thing because it's so much smaller, and you're going to lose. Man, what was it? 30 pounds? I think a 30 pounds difference. I think is what it is.
30 pounds. What the 1981 and up And some of the early non-lockup 999s had a 274 first gear, 154 second.
Hmm.
The early 904s had the same gear ratios as a 727.
Yeah.
So this 2/10 to 3/10 improvement you get is using the deeper gears.
Yes.
Uh, but it's still more efficient regardless. I could make a video. I've been thinking about making a video. I should do this with you, Professor P.
Yeah.
I should call this thing 5 ways a 904 is better, just to get the haters stirred up. Because there are several things I like better about a 904. I like the way that the ring gears, for example, are one piece with the
Hmm.
hub. Okay, I like that. There's several little things I just think are better about them.
Yeah.
And
And just rotating mass. It's so much smaller. And I picked up, not only did I get a faster uh, time, but I picked up a mile an hour. So that just tells you, that's time is just acceleration. That's from the gears. But as far as the mile an hour, that comes straight from the fact that I was just turning less mass, and it just picked up. Plus the converter was much smaller. Everything was just smaller on it. I just like it better.
904 has a shorter strut for second gear, so they don't bend up and fall down in the pan like a 727.
Right.
There's so many little things I just think are better about a 904.
You know that I have some 904 porn that's in my car right now that I'm actually going to be taking out. I'm going to save it, but I'm going to show you some pictures of my 904. It's got some billet stuff in it, some really cool billet stuff in it. Really cool.
But the point is, yes, the 904 is a very worthy piece. As with any transmission, if you don't have your bands adjusted, or you don't have enough pressure on your clutch packs and they slip and slide like you don't run a shift kit, you'll tear up any transmission. But a
Hmm.
904 done right can do great things.
Dougster actually is quoting something that I say quite often. Here we go. I say this to my wife all the time. Yes. Mm-hmm. No, don't take them off. That's good. Just leave them just like that. Do you know the song?
Yeah, I get
Oh,
what he's
okay.
saying. I get
Yeah,
what he's
yeah.
saying.
Right. So yeah, I'm all about the 904, and I also like the fact that I've never broke. The only thing I've ever broke on a 904 is on the input shaft where it goes into the aluminum. What's that? The ring. Planetary. I think it's the aluminum planetary, and there's that clip that goes in the back there. I basically stripped all those splines right off on mine, and that was just. It was basically going from first to second gear, and it hit so hard in the second gear, it just stripped all those things right off.
So, like your 727s that came behind Hemis, the fabled Hemi 727, that was an aluminum three-pinion Planet.
Yeah,
904, you can get 4 pinion steel.
that's
And there's
right.
just so many little things I like better about a 904.
And that's
And,
that's
well, Twisted Mopars talk about boring a 318 to 340. We should segue into sonic checking because that's something Professor P knows a lot about.
yes. I've done a lot of sonic checking on this. Now, that's a big overbore from a 318 to a 340. Yeah, I've only seen a few blocks that can do that. In fact, I don't even think the early blocks were the ones to do it. I would say it would be the later blocks. The ones that I did a lot of sonic checking on believe it or not, were the late 80s. Some of those that were Heco de Mexico were some of the best blocks. Believe it or not, they had the thickest core on the thrust side, and they were some of the best ones that you can overbore. In fact, the block that's in my race car right now is an 87 block. It's my very last block that I've got. That's got I don't remember off the top of my head how much cylinder wall thickness it's got, but I bought into that whole thing. I've said this a few times on here. The 1970 360 block is the one to get because they didn't have 360 cores, so you buy it's made on 340 core. I bought into that until I bought a sonic checker, and then I went out and tested the block that I cracked, and it was like 120 thousandths wall thickness. I'm like, whoa,
So,
and it was thin on that thrust side, and it was only 30 over. And then I started going around and checking all of them, and it was really thinned out. So it was compared to that 87 block. Like I said, I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but it was really, really, It was substantially different. So, if you're going to be doing one of these, look, don't hesitate. Look at that funny ear. And they have it's a hydraulic roller cam, but still has LA heads on it. And they were like kind of like this bastard stepchild. Nobody wants to build them.
87 to 91.
Yeah, 87 to 91, exactly. And
85 to 91. 85.
Was it 85? Yeah, okay.
85, yep.
They're kind of like a bastard stepchild. Nobody wants them, but I got to tell you that some of the thickest blocks that I have found have fallen in that realm right there, because they were kind of they were just really good blocks.
Well, one thing to keep in mind, we talk about 130 thousandths of overbore. Yeah, you're only talking about, it's a very small amount, but this is a piece of cylinder wall right here.
Yeah, that's it.
This is all they are and this is out of a big block Chevrolet.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. That's all you got.
Yeah. Dougster says there used to be 500 small block Chevys at the dragway about 10 years ago. It had diesel sleeves in it and cement and what was left of the cooling jackets and most elaborate cradle girdle ever. Air-cooled small block Chevrolet. My block right here, the one that I have here, has got concrete. It's got hard block in it. And it's about a half an inch down from the water hole that goes in. So it's basically about an inch and a half from the top. And it is a 4-inch stroke block, so really the bang only happens in the top 2 inches anyways. That's where most of the heat's being produced. But it's still going to keep some heat in there. In fact, when we were boring that block out, and when we were in San Diego, we had to bore one, and then we had to run coolant through it and let it cool back down because we couldn't get an accurate bore on it when we were checking it. I was the one that was actually doing it, and I was just like, whoa, because it would insulate the heat so much it wouldn't radiate. It would just all that block, all that heat would just get into the hard block. So it was something. Yeah.
Dust Devil, yeah, they were factory roller cam blocks, and you can tell because they have really tall bores for the lifters, but you can run flat tap lifters in them.
Yes, and in fact, they had the holes, like you were saying, so you could run either a Magnum head or you can run a regular head, and it had the holes in it so that way for the dog bones. So it's a really cool thing. 86 to 91, 318 was an LA roller. 89 to 91 was a 360 roller. Okay, so that's what it was. But mine is an 87 360, and it says on the side of it 87, and it's a 360 block. But it's definitely a hydraulic roller 87. So I don't know, Patrick, on that one. It could be, but once again, it was cast in 87, so who knows what it was in.
Hung budget converted his 318 to hydraulic roller, but the thing is, that's like an extra $1,000 that you don't have to spend.
Yeah, because it's already there.
Exactly.
Yeah, and in fact, I've thrown out some of my recipes that I had for a 360 with remember when they had those Engine Quest heads that came out for the. You get those Engine Quest heads for the Magnum, and they were like really good. And you could actually get them unported, and I think it was like 450 or 450 horsepower I could get on one of those with a 360 bore. But I had to make the cam specific for a hydraulic roller because you could only get 340 as far as at cam lift. So then I would run, like, say, with the Magnum head, I'd run a 1/6 ratio rocker so that way I could get my lift back up. But with the dog bone, that's all I was able to get with the camshaft was 340, I believe is what it was.
$1,300 what he spent to convert that to roller cam. Ouch.
You could buy that whole. Right now, you can get a Magnum block for $500, I think, running. Even cheaper than that. They're essentially core at this point.
Well, that does make for an interesting point, though, because still not everybody realizes that new lifter technology that's coming out, the DLC. That, to me, I'm kind of waiting to see more on that because I have a 340 I want to do, and I'm thinking of going just flat tap it because of that right there alone.
Yeah, I got to tell you that's if I didn't go this 360 that I have in the Monster right now, that's my last LA style block, and then after that I'm going to go Gen 3 Hemi. But I might just keep that around and take the solid roller out of it, and then just turn that engine into a high revving short stroke flat tappet style of camshaft in that thing, because that thing is that DLC coated lifter stuff is no joke. I've seen the testing on it. I was actually there watching it for weeks and weeks and weeks on end, and it's an amazing technology.
So when Blown Budget Garage, he says shaft rockers beat independent rocker arms. The reason for independent rocker, I think a small block Chevy has the worst of both worlds. They have no rocker shaft, but they're all in a line. The only reason to give up the rocker shaft is so you can get canted valves and move them off of that line. But there are heads that have individual rocker shafts, and to me, that's the hot ticket.
Yeah, and also too with the Chevy, you're dealing with two functions that you have to worry about. You're going to have the installed height of the rocker arm and then push rod length, and then that's going to set up your geometry. That's why it's really important on those. Where Mopar has got it really kind of right off the bat, you're really going to change it by 5 or 10 thousandths as far as on the shaft. They make some of those, but you can really run a profile on the valve, and you'll see that it's really right in the center right off the bat. Where on the Chevrolet, that's why they're all over the place on those. If I could go with anything, then that's the reason why I went Mopar right off the bat, is because they had 18-degree heads, they had shaft mount rockers, they had a longer rod, they had a higher deck height, and essentially they're race car engines in my junkyard. That's what I could afford at the time, cars. And I could spray a bunch of nitrous to it, and I could run the crap out of it and RPM them to the moon, and it would survive. Whereas Chevrolet, you had to, at that time, parts were cheaper, with the super shops and whatnot, but they were breaking rocker arms. They had to get guide plates, and they were always breaking something as far as in the Valvetrain at that time. This was in the 1990s. Now they've got it all figured out, but back then that's the reason why I became Mopar guys, because that stuff was already taken care of. All I had to do was figure out how to put headers in an early A body. That was my biggest problem.
Junkyard D, you can look up a DLC coated lifter from Comp Cams. I got to see them in person at PRI, and I got to tell you, my first impressions were really good. It looks like black chrome, but the durability on them is pretty incredible. DLC coated lifter from Comp Cams. If you look that up, I'm sure you can find some stuff on them.
Diamond light coating, yeah. So what I'll do is next week I'll get we'll talk about that a little bit too next week, and I'll get some information on it, and I'll get some lifters, and I'll actually show you on those. And we did the worst of the worst testing on it, as far as Billy Joe Bob in his dirt whatever,
right?
And we basically started them up, and we did a proper break-in like you would, and then we did them with no break-in, and we ran it through the worst scenarios, and it survived everything we threw at it, and it was just incredible on how well it works. It was just incredible, literally game changer.
We know people in this community, we could probably just say, here, break this camion for us, and gotten exactly the same kind of conditions. right.
Yeah, but this way we can actually put test equipment on it and get some sort of data instead of it broke.
Right.
Oh, hey, Dallas just chiming in.
The house?
Yeah, come on.
What's going on?
There we go. That's why I like Buick stuff. Shaft mount rockers and 15-degree heads. Exactly. Right. Yeah.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
What is he saying here? Y'all make me sick. I've got close to $4,000 into my 318. Back when before me and Dallas actually met each other in the mid 90s, we were probably racing around at the same tracks or in Southern California. I used to get those engines for $79, literally $79, and that was with a warranty. It was actually $50, and you had 30 days on that warranty, and so you would just try to spray the crap out of it, and I couldn't break them. Sometimes I would, if the tune was wrong. It was my fault if I blew them up, but people were running the same stuff on the Chevys, and they were launching out whole sides of the block. The first time I ever saw an engine split in half was on a Ford 302, and literally split right down the center of the block, and it just filleted it in half like this. That was something special. Determine the correct timing on this strip here. What is your procedure to determine the correct timing for strip use? Okay, this is actually good.
That's a wonderful question.
What's that?
That's a wonderful question.
Yes, it is. So I learned a long time ago, and I'm not a name dropper, by a lot of people, on how to tune cars. The one thing that I was told is that you time for torque and you carburate for horsepower. So what we would do is we would get out there and we would set the timing, and we would do just some 330 pulls. You know, you would basically get your 60 foot and your 330. That would tell you basically your torque. That would get you your mile an hour up to that point. It would get you your 60 foot. I would basically just start timing it until your 60 foot's really going to come down to traction, but your torque is going to be at a 330, and you'll really see it come down once after a 330. Then you can start, checking your timing. Now, if you know how to read plugs, that's a lot harder of me to try to explain it to you through a computer. But there's a lot of videos that people show on how to look at plugs as far as for timing on them. As far as the back strap, you're really going to be looking at the back strap and how clean it is, where it comes down to the ring. It's hard for me to explain it. You can just look at some pictures, but you really want to have about 2/3 to 3/4 of the way down on the back strap. That'll be your heat range on it. You can look at that kind of stuff. I would also, nowadays widebands are so inexpensive nowadays. I'd get a wideband so you can get your fuel, mixture correct right off the bat. You can usually get it in 2 or 3 shots down the track, and then you could just start playing with your timing at that point. That's basically how I would do it. But I would just you time for torque and you carburate for horsepower. What's your thoughts on that one?
If you're looking for a good tutorial on this process, Don Gould that has makes the FBO boxes, the 4secondsflat.com, I think is his website. He makes distributors. He makes 4-pin replacement boxes for the Mopar ignition. He walks you through your timing and your mixture for the process, basically what Professor P is telling you. But that's a good one. I agree with it. I basically, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know that I'm that talented. I'm more like a trust the wideband. I'm not as good a tuner as like an Andy Wood or Professor P, but they're not wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, right here. This is the truth right here. This is Dallas right here. $79 for a 420 FE here. SoCal junkyards were fantastic. That is the truth. I picked up a bunch of 440s for $79 out of motorhomes, and they all had steel cranks. They had the water jacketed heads, but they still had the good block and the good heads and the rod. So, but $79, man, that's the truth.
I tell you, Dallas is a really good tuner. Dallas is the only person I've ever ridden with who literally every time he fills up for gas, he'll think nothing about jumping out and making a carburetor adjustment.
Yeah.
Thing is, though, is when you do that and you get that good and that slick and get that ironed out, you really get to be a good tuner.
Yeah.
I mean, so he can get every 1/10 of a mile a gallon out of a carbureted vehicle because he has been so religious about, working with his tune. So.
Yep, that's how I do it, and that's why when I was driving back and forth to Crower, and then also now when I moved here, I had to rechange my tune because the air was a little different. When I was going out to TCI, it's 45 miles, pretty much one way, and I would just bring my jets and my metering rods and my springs with me, and then just pull over on the side of the road and change them out and start going again. But yeah, here he goes. He says right here, the plugs burn to the curve on the backstrap when the timing is right. It's exactly right. And you will see it. Right. I mean, there is a definitive line there if it's correct. Yeah. But if you want to know what you're looking for, just look for some pictures online, and you'll actually see what you're looking for.
Professor P, and then tell me what you think of this. It's
sure.
Your show. You want to maybe at the top of the hour get into bore measuring because I think Randall has a good question here on he wants your opinion on locking out the distributor versus setting a timing curve. Bear in mind Randall's car is a street car, but that said, just in general, thoughts on locking out a distributor versus doing a curve.
Yeah. Now, I've tried this both ways because I wanted to see if on a slant 6, I think I was talking about this last week or week before, I actually tried to lock out a slant 6 because it's with the 276 gear in the rear end, it really just wants 24 degrees timing or 22 degrees right in there for a very long time. So I tried to lock it out at 24 degrees. The problem is that when I was trying to start it, and then also too when you're up in the high RPMs, like when you're cruising down the road, the mileage just went to crap because it's locked out. I couldn't get any of the vacuum advance. Now, if this is something that you're driving around just as a hot rod, you might be able to get away with it. There's a few, I think an MSD box has got one where you push a button, you get 20 degrees. It's a start retard. They have a few other ones where you can, you can kind of dial it in. MSD's got one now, so you can set it up. But when you lock out your distributor, you're really going to, especially on a street vehicle that you're going to drive, and it's not a race car, it's not a strip car, it's more of a driver, you're going to kill your mileage because you want that timing curve. When the fuel starts to go lean, you want that thing to go really far advanced, like 45, 50 degrees of timing when you're cruising down the road, because that's how you get your mileage. And I would definitely I definitely wouldn't lock it out, and I definitely would do a spring kit on it. Play with it a little bit. Try to get it. Find out where, as far as you can get to the advance, you'll hear it knock. You'll like, oh, okay, that's a little much. Back it off. But I had 2 or 3 different distributors that I set up with the same springs and set and whatnot. And at the time when I was doing my Slant 6, they have an incredible amount of advance in those things, because those things were mostly set up after TDC, or some of them were at 0. So they have like 30 degrees of timing built into the distributor, and then they put another 15 on top of that. Well, when you hot rod them, you got to take some of that timing away. So I started welding up the plate, and I limited it to 15 degrees. So I was getting about, say, 14 degrees of initial and 29 degrees total timing. And then I started playing with the vacuum advance, so that way I could dial that in on how it was coming in. But I would definitely not lock out my distributor if it was a driver. You're really going to kill the mileage. If you don't mind 8 miles to the gallon, then that's fine. But I wouldn't do that. What's your thoughts on that one? Same thing happened to you?
Yeah. Well, yeah. My thought is just limit it so that you can have that 10, 15 degrees initial or whatever, so that it starts nice and easy and you don't get too much total. There's no place you can put that stock distributor that it's happy. There's not. So you pretty much have to limit it. I will say this. I'm not familiar with them. I did get to see one here last month, but all the old distributors have a slot. Okay. And you can narrow the slots so you can reduce how much centrifugal advance you get. But the newer Mopar performance distributors, they have one that you don't have to weld up the slots or modify. You can loosen a couple of Phillips head screws, and they have a little plate that you can turn.
Oh, wow.
Plate back. Yeah. And so if you go to Dart Freak 75's channel, he has a couple of those. He has one in his Dart. I hadn't seen one before. This is interesting. But you can loosen a couple of screws. You can turn a cam plate in the distributor, tighten them down, and you can shorten up how much timing total advance it will make.
Yeah. You were talking about that guy earlier about who's got that 4-pin conversion. What was his name again?
Don Gould, 4 seconds flat.
4 seconds flat. So what I did is I bought a plate from him for the wife's car, because getting mine welded up was difficult, because you got to figure out the width of it, then the length of it. Me being an engineer wasn't that big of a deal, but then it's not exactly right, so then you're filing it down to get the slot just right. But I bought one of his plates that you actually put on top of it, and it was a lockout, and then it came with springs, and I was able to nail the wife's because I knew exactly what it needed. So I was able to nail it within one try. No, it was a second try. The first one I went in, I had too light of a spring on the one side, so I put a little heavier spring in it, and then it was beautiful. It worked just fine. So yeah, I would go to him if you're looking at that. They have a drop-in plate that you go in there. You still got to take it all apart, but it drops right on, and that way you don't have to weld up any things or not.
Well, the plate too. You can also, if you ever want to repurpose the distributor for something else, you can take it out. You can also adjust it so it's got slots. Yeah. I've got one here in the office somewhere. They got slots for like 10, 12, 8, 6, or whatever. Yep. However you phase that plate, you can take it back apart and readjust it. So say you go too far, you can do it that way. No welding. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, and this is what he was talking about, the progressive ignition distributor. I think as we're talking about also too, the MSD's got that new 6AL box where you can actually just tell it whatever you want. You lock out the distributor, and then you tell it This is how much initial it is right there, and then it does all the curve for you. It's actually pretty kind of cool.
So when Andy Wood got his truck out at the track for the first test of the season in February,
Hmm.
he told me he would stop at like a stoplight driving the truck over and take his phone because it works off of Bluetooth, and he was adjusting his ignition timing.
That's awesome.
I mean, it's just the coolest thing.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Streetcar equals adjustable timing curve with vacuum advanced race car locked at peak power time. Yep, exactly. That's exactly right. That's he put it in the most eloquent, non bullshit way to say it, a non engineering way to say it. So yeah, that's exactly the way I would do it, right there.
Dougster's digging that Dallas is back. Me too. I'm always happy to see Dallas.
Yeah, me too. I talked to Dallas today, and it's good to hear his voice, and he sounds really good. So that's good.
Yeah.
Happy to hear that. But yeah, we're getting close to this. So I actually, those who are privileged enough, has my phone number, and I set up a little texting web ring, and I send out text to different people, and we have a little text where we send stupid memes to each other, but we also talk about car stuff. And I asked them, hey, what's something that you guys would want to talk about, that most people wouldn't just glaze over and, start licking the screen or drooling. And someone came up with stepped headers. And I was just like, yeah, I could talk about that. But, yeah, I would get the look mostly with people. So we're going to go with the other one, plastic gauge. And I sent this over to John Wilburn.
Yeah.
And this also segues from last week we were talking about with rod stretch, as far as bolt stretch, right? So here's my thoughts on plastic gauge. First and foremost, you have to have an absolutely clean surface. Now, before I go any further, to me, plastic gauge is your calipers. That is a caliper quick check. This is just to get you in the ballpark. This is just my opinion. I use a bore mic for race car engine stuff. Now, here's the time that I use plastic gauge. If I've already built my engine and I'm just doing a freshen up on it, and I already know what the measurement of the bearing is because I have it on my little build sheet, and I buy the new bearings, I can check the thickness of the bearing, I can put it in there, and I can put plastic gauge on it, and just to see if I get a quick check. That's the way I use plastic gauge. If I'm building an engine from beginning, I'm definitely going to be using a bore mic, because a bore mic is going to get me down to the 10th of a thousandth, and that way I can monitor it, and I can also do it with bearing crush. I can play with bearing crush on how much I'm actually crushing out, and I can measure fall away. So like tighter in one section and bigger in the other. So under loads, I know that this is going to stretch out and this is going to pull in. So with plastic gauge, you can come close to that, but you're not really going to know exactly what it is. But here's the one things that I've seen people with plastic gauge. I was over at a friend's house when they were building an engine, and he was just like, hey man, you mind if you watch me build? And I was like, sure, go ahead. So then I was like, do you want me to tell you what you're doing wrong, or do you just want me to let you go? And he's let me go. So he was using blue like paper towels. And so we all know if you can see it, it can be measured, right? So when he was cleaning up the surface of the bearing, he was actually wiping with this towel. So you can see that, so it's there. And it didn't come out. Then he put the bearing on top of it, put the plastic gauge in there, and didn't clean the bearings, put the crank in there, put the cap on it, and then cranked it down. So far sounds good. This is what most people do. But then when he took the cap off, he took the cap and he walked it back and forth to loosen it up and then popped it up. Here's the thing about a plastic gauge. Plastic gauge works on crush, right? So if you're taking that thing and you're crushing it down, then you're not able to pull that cap up exactly square like an LS. If you don't have a cap puller like an LS, but if you're walking it back and forth, even if you measure it right in the center, you're going to get an obscure measurement because you're moving that cap back and forth, because remember, that plastic gauge is taking up the gap on both sides. So you're only measuring the gap on one side because you're crushing it down. So you're only measuring the bearing clearance on that one side.
Real quick, just for those who might not be familiar with plastic gauge,
yes,
it does look like this. It's just long filaments of plastic, and then the envelope has a scale that will show you by the width of it when it's crushed what
Hmm.
that height of it is. And the height
Exactly.
of it is your bearing clearance. So I'm just putting that up there for reference. I try not to take for granted that everybody knows exactly what we're, because we got a pretty big community with a lot of range in it.
Yeah, and like I said, plastic gauge is totally fine if your clearances are like a stock engine, stock, whatnot, and but you got to clean it correctly. Here's the so then he took it off and we measured it, and he was like, "Hey man, this thing's really tight," and like it was way too tight, like it was under 1,000 tight. And then I told him, I was like, "Well, do you mind if I try it again?" So then I went and had him go get some coffee filters, because coffee filters are the best because they leave no residue. That's it. That's what I clean all my engine blocks with. We had some paint thinner, and then we used acetone. So we used the paint thinner, got all the little fibers off, cleaned the bearings, put them in there. No fingerprints on them because fingerprints got oils. You'll pick that up, and then cleaned the bearing surface, put the bearing on, put the cap on, and then how I pulled it up is I took the rod bolts out, the main cap bolts out, and then I took the bolts and put them sideways and pulled it straight up like that, and that way I could pull it straight up, and it showed that we had a thou and a half. Now on a slant six, that's totally fine. So he went from thinking he had a problem because of the plastic gauge, because of all the stack tolerance that he had from all the crap in there. But even with the bore mic, that would have shown up. But on a bore mic, you would have measured it here, you would have measured it here, and you would have measured here, and you would have seen that there was a problem because you would have had different measurements because all the fibers and whatnot you would have seen it. Like, wait a second, this is supposed to be a thou tighter, but here's a thou. Like, say this is 20125, and this is also 20125. Why is that? Well, because you had crap on this side, you didn't clean it off, and that's why when you put the plastic gauge in there, it actually showed a tighter reading. So
There's a lot of ways to mess this up. Like you said,
yes,
walking the cap, or if the crank turns anything,
moves.
anything that drags or smashes or anything that, you're
Hmm.
going to get a reading that looks tighter than it is.
Yes, and that's the biggest thing with it, is that people are always going to feel that they need an underbearing. They're going to need a plus bearing or something because of plastic gauge. And I've seen people have now too loose of bearing clearances. No one's going to know. Only your oil pressure will know, but you just can thicken that up. The problem is that people start thinking that they need to have a crank polished, and they start going, a thou under on the bearings, and then what was 2.5 now is 3.5, even 4. And on most race engines, not a problem, but something you're driving on the street that's going to be idling, with 215 degrees of oil temperatures,
Right.
that's where you're going to have a problem. And it's not necessarily going to be on your mains; it's going to be on your rods, because most of the bearings are only going to be getting oil, every half turn of the crank, because most of them are going to be not full groove bearings. So that's, if you can. And now bore mics, you can pick up a $99 bore mic from Summit Racing nowadays. I know it's Heco de Mexico, or even China at this point, but I have a nice Starrett one. It's rather expensive, but it works, and I've checked it. I also have a $99 one, and they're within a tenth or so, a tenth of a thousandth, I should say. Um, I trust the Starrett one obviously better, and but also too, it comes down to user. You really got to know how to use it, because you can't just run a bore mic. You have to put it into a set of micrometers that you trust, and then you have to get in there and get it accurate, and you have to know how to put it in there and walk it back and forth, so that way you know where the zero is at. So it's a skill and it's an art, learning how to use a bore mic, but it's something that a lot of them now have the wheels on it, so that way they can square them up easier. But then you have to rock it back and forth, and that's why a lot of people go with the plastic gauge. I guess it's because of the art. What's your thoughts on that one?
One thing I'll mention about that, you talk about a Starrett, and I've got a Starrett caliper and I like their stuff, but I would rather have the worst Chinese made measuring tools, but have some skill and experience and repetition at doing the measurements, than have the best measuring tools and not have that. I've
Mm-hmm.
seen numerous people take measurements, and I can just watch them use a caliper or a mic and can tell they're not getting good numbers. And it just takes a little bit of experience, takes some repetition to learn how to use that mic and find where that gauge, and watch the needle and actually learn how to get it parallel on the board, et cetera, et cetera. So I wouldn't
And,
stress necessarily the most
nope, I think we lost you.
expensive tool. Would stress. Oh, well, I'm still here.
Oh yeah,
I
there you
wouldn't
go. You're
stress
back.
getting the most expensive tools. I would stress learning to use them properly. Um, I actually took some machine classes that are here local to me, Giles County High School, and man, I got to learn all kinds of neat things. So you know what? It's free, costs nothing. Now, they have like a little small fee for materials, but
No.
it's free and it's an evening. So if you want to get into that, that will help you with your builds. You'll be able to transfer a lot of that knowledge to your stuff that you do.
And also too, if you want to just be a better engine builder in general, always keep a record of your engine. Always, the stuff's free now online. Just get one of those blueprint lists out, sheets, and just fill it out. That way, when you take the thing back down and you can look at it and you can see what's going on with it, and you'll see, oh wow, I'm starting to develop a problem here. And it only takes an extra hour or so to remeasure everything, but it saves you thousands of dollars later on because you'll see something going on before you actually, because most people just look at the bearings, but you're not going to see if there's shelling on it at first, or if it's cocking or crooking, or if it's walking on the cap on the top. But you'll be able to measure that. You'll be able to see, wow, this thing was 2125 and on the center now it's 2126. Why did I lose 1,000th? Why did I gain 1,000th on this side? That doesn't make any sense, and that's because of bearing crush, and it's just because it either one of your bolts came loose or something, or one of the threads are starting to pull out, so that way it was less force on there, so it was starting to walk back and forth, or you having harmonic problems, the balance wasn't correct, so on and so forth. And someone did say up here that 10 people can get 10 different readings on a mic, though that's the big problem. I disagree with that.
They can if they don't know what they're doing.
Exactly. That is correct. But if they know what they're doing, when you say different readings, they're going to be different readings that are so negligible, under a tenth of a thousandth. Usually on my Starrett, a tenth of a thousandth is about an inch, is a tenth of a thousandth. So yeah, the needle may be here one time and it may be here one time, but that's under 0.00005. So negligible.
Well, it's something that, and see, this is what I think is, and of course, Professor P has his own thoughts. This is the one thing I like about when you and I do stuff together, is because I try to always keep in mind the other end of the spectrum who are not professional engineers. So one thing I'll bring up at this point, and I don't know that Professor P even thinks about this much because he is legitimately a pro. Tolerance and clearance are not the same thing. I cannot tell you how many professional machinists. I was talking to a machinist who I know machined parts for a car that was in the field at the Winter Nationals in 1970 or 71. And the guy uses the word tolerance and clearance interchangeably. And when he looks in the book, he says, well, you just have to use common sense when you cut stuff. No. A clearance is a specification. A tolerance is how much it can vary upon the specification. Mm-hmm. So I saw a machinist, and this was for a guy on YouTube. He was having a crankshaft cut for his 6-cylinder Chevrolet. And his machinist insisted that it was supposed to be 1,000th on the mains for this Chevrolet. And several of us said, no, it's 1,000th if you want your crank to be in the scrap pile next week. But it should be roughly 1,000th per inch of journal. That's a rough rule of thumb.
That's rule of thumb, yeah.
Yeah, so that 1,000th is way too tight, obviously, because that's probably a 2.5, 3/4, maybe even 3-inch journal in that thing. So 1,000th is way too little. What it was is the clearance on the thing was supposed to be, if I recall, the clearance was supposed to be between 1.5 and 2.5, and the tolerance on that was 1,000th. So it could be between 2 and 4 is what it wound up being. Mm-hmm. So 3 was supposed to be what it was. The tolerance was 1,000th, so between 2 and 4. The tolerance is on each side of the clearance spec. So I'm just saying that because I'm surprised how many people I meet that don't realize those are not synonyms for one another.
No. One is the measurement. The other one is how much you're allowed to go the other direction, or plus or minus. Yes. And also, too, here's one point that I forgot to mention, and Dallas nailed it. The crank fillets are what screw people up with plastic gauge, 100%, because if you don't set that thing in there correctly, it will walk over, and then what it will do is it'll smear that thing across, and it will stretch it out longer than it needs to be, or actually what it was. And that's why when they tell you to put plastic gauge, you try to take the whole way across the bearing, so that way when you smash it down, it doesn't walk on the fillets or whatnot. But that is a key point there. That does happen.
Dust Devil's talking about. Dust Devil's a machinist by trade, by the way. Twisted Mopar, seen people get varying readings of the tape measure. I've seen a lot of college students who do not know how to use tape measures legitimately. So don't take for granted that people understand their measuring equipment, but
I agree with this statement now. 10 people will get 10 different readings if 9 of them don't know what they're doing. Yes, oh, yeah. You are absolutely correct in that statement. 100%, because I rarely see people use the stuff correctly, the tools, Yeah. Right here.
Right. And I've seen a lot of too is not just using the tools, but knowing where to measure. Like when you measure a bore, there's an awful lot of difference between on the ridge to under the ridge to down at the bottom of the bore, to measure it on the thrust surface, to measure it at 90 and the 45s. You're supposed to have different numbers all of those places, and how to interpret them.
Yeah, I do 6 in each bore. I do 6 different measurements. I do, thrust side, this side at the top, in the middle, and then at the bottom where you're going to walk. Obviously, the top is going to be your biggest because that's where the bang happens. But then usually I've noticed in some of them, especially with bigger stroker engines, they kind of do like an hourglass, because at the bottom, that piston's rocking back and forth as that big arm's swinging back around, especially when they're having a lot of the piston hanging out. So I've seen it now to where before it was just, it would just be like a cone. I mean, that's exaggerated, but as far as numbers go, it would represent a cone. But now I've noticed that they kind of do this number. So yeah, but Muscle Car Solutions, thanks for the carburetor, by the way. Thank God for digital, because my veneer calipers are practically useless with these old eyes, right? I have to wear, these are no line bifocals. When did that happen? When did that happen? And I have now, in my jet box, I actually have a very small magnifying glass.
You have a loop magnifier? So you look like you're trying to appraise a diamond with your jets out there at the track?
I can't even use that anymore. It doesn't work. I actually have a magnifying glass like that I have to do this with these on. Man, I'm telling you.
I've only got 2 years to tease you about being old, so I can't really, don't want to do that.
Yeah, right? Rain and Slant 6 with a chance at cannonballs. That is like...
Love that username.
That is awesome. Also with these micrometers, you need to mic with a rounded tip anvil if you're going to check nickness of things like bearing shells, rod inserts, main bearings, cam bearings with a curved flatter back. Yes, I forgot to mention that. You're absolutely correct. I do have a set of mics that are designed just for bearings, and one side of it is curved just for that. So that way the flat back, and then it's curved so that way it gets on the inside. Otherwise it'll never be correct. Thanks for mentioning that. I totally forgot to mention that. And here, Dallas says, I err on the side of loose. I always do also. In fact, I always add a couple tenths of a thousandths. When the last time you heard of an engine, come on Dallas, engine being too loose and it blew up. Being too tight is where everybody knew it was too tight. Yeah, I was mentioning that earlier, but yes, I do the same thing. And I just, since I change all my oiling on everything, so that way I know that there's never any high velocity oil going anywhere. It's all going to be high pressure and lower velocity, because I'm feeding it from many different directions. I don't usually have any problems with that stuff. So yeah, I always err on the side of loose also. I picked up a 2-inch micrometer at a motorcycle swap meet for $5. Cool. It's a slow comb made in the USA. Yes, that's awesome. In fact, all my mics I got from I actually got them from that place, a Craigslist. Remember that? Remember when everything was a Craigslist? That's like when it was still like cool. I picked up a box of mics, a Starrett, from a closeout sale, and it was literally from 0 all the way up to 6-inch. It's 6 or 7 in there, and yeah, it was it's a hell of a deal. So yeah, and it was $100, I think is what it was. And those, and it comes with a box with the foam in it and their whole thing, and this little Starrett thing right on top. So yeah, I couldn't complain with that. Colleen, in mechanical drafting class, we had to verbally recite 0 to 1 inch in 16th increments. I aced it. Awesome. Well,
What are we, 0.041 for the first one? I used to be able to do that because I would do it a lot of calculator and tape measure. And when you go back and forth, it's handy to know that.
yeah. Reinstein, I mentioned a well-known ignition guy, Mallory Distributor, Wizard for book recommendation. He recommended that the book you mentioned with a solid source. What was that book? I must have skipped it. Do you remember? Did anyone? No. Oh, is it right here? Is this it? The Jacobs Ignition book. That's it. Okay. I remember Jacobs Ignition when they came out. That was early '90s. Remember that they used to have those big boxes and all that. They were like the thing to have. It was like the the big bulky coil, and then they had this like little onboard computer, and I saw a video of Freiberger. I guess he worked for Jacobs, and there was a video of him that he was the one that came up with the porcelain cap that used to go over the top of the spark plugs to keep them from burning. And then he made a video saying that, yeah, here's 20 years ago or 30 years ago, Freiberger helping out Freiberger now, because now we're not melting, caps. So I thought that was kind of funny. Doug Sturr, professor's now doing the Sherlock Holmes. Yes, it's actually worse. Sherlock Holmes actually just had like one of those little monocles like things. No, mine's like a full blown. Yes, one of those deals, it's one of those deals. Yeah, it's terrible. Whatever, it is what it is.
I should get a monocle so I can look like Mr. Peanut. Having the
right. It's funny because a lot of us at work, we have one that we share. And I used to have an office I used to share with someone. I'm not going to mention his name here. I won't call him out. And he used to keep one on his desk. And he used to see these two guys. We were about the same age. And we have another group of younger at the time engineers. And we would be in there with this monocle looking at jets just like this. And they would just be, I'm like, what size is this? And he goes, oh, that's 67. I'm like, damn, you're right. Progressive lenses, man. Yeah, I don't know. I think I might just I might just break down and get the LASIK. All it is just astigmatism. It's all I got. Yeah.
So to me, I don't know what my vision is, but I know two things. Yep. I can still pass the DMV vision test, which means in Virginia I can renew once by mail. I get 8 years of the license, and I'm going to be 61 years old before I got to pass that test again. That's one. And two, as long as you can see your thumbnail at the full stretch of your arm, that's a pistol sight, you can still shoot. You don't have to have vision to shoot. You just have to be able to see your sight. That's it.
I'm good.
That's it. You can see your thumbnail with focus at arm's length. You can still shoot.
Oh, well, that's... Load off my mind. I'm good then.
I literally, we're talking about vision. If you go to like a match and you watch these old guys who can't see at all, and they have Coke bottle glasses, but they can still shoot. That's the secret to it. They can still focus at the distance of their pistol sight. They can't see the targets. They don't know what they're hitting. They can still see their sights. They can still shoot. They just have to literally walk up and stand on it to see where they hit.
Yeah.
So that's just a little FYI.
Yeah, right.
About vision. No. That's all I care about. I just want to be able to not run into cars on the highway and still shoot. That's it.
Oh, yeah, okay. Mr. H. Ray. Glad to see you're participating. I hope you are doing it guilt-free, and that is all moving positively. Hanging Chief. Sending positive thoughts your way. Always sending positive thoughts that way. Absolutely. Retired draftsman. Here we go. Mr. Dragster, one of my dad's closest friends is a retired draftsman who would periodically do work for his handwritten notes. He would leave me amazing. The letters were all perfect. He would print. Wow. I can't. My handwriting is atrocious. That's why I'm glad we have computers now. And my spelling skills are even worse. So.
I had to do cursive in school. I was forced to. And when I graduated on the 19th of May, 1994, I never used that horrible stuff ever again.
Really?
Yeah, because you know why we have cursive. Do you know why we have cursive as a society? Because when you dipped your pen in ink, your quill in ink, you couldn't lift it to go to the next letter. So as
Oh,
soon as we came out with the ballpoint pen about 130 years ago, cursive was totally unnecessary.
oh, okay. Well,
The people say it's pretty, but I think that it's unreadable. I hate it.
for me, it's if I don't know how to spell a word, good.
No one will know.
Hey, man, I'm being honest. Clint saying that he did LASIK. Oh, well, good. I'm glad. You know.
Great.
Schmidt was saying that didn't you have pink eye not too long ago? Showing monocle sounds not too good. I got pink eye, but it was from my kids, and that was in San Diego. So, yeah, it was terrible. But we were one more thing. I know this is not car related, but I'm just going to share this real quick. That I've been riding the kids ragged. We've been riding our bikes and whatnot, and so the other day we did. This was yesterday. We did 11.49 miles.
Wow. Look at that circuit.
Yeah, and we did it all the way around Collierville, and yeah, it was a good run. And I've got 3 kids, riding. 2 of them 8-year-olds, and my youngest just got a. I just got her. She was riding an old school Schwinn, but she kind of grew out of it, and it had the small cranks, and so it was really hard for her to keep up. So I told her, it's like, Roxy, if you really want to go ride with us, if you want a new bike, I'll get you a new bike. She's like, no, I love my bike. And then on Monday, she goes, Daddy, I want a new bike. So we went out, and I was like, pick out whatever one you want, right? And she goes up, and we went to the academy, and she picked up the one that was like $99 because it was red and black. I was like, okay, is that the one you want? She goes, yeah. So secretively, I went down and got better cranks, got better wheels, and I just changed all that stuff. But it still looks like the bike that she bought, and so now she's able to be right in the back. So yeah, it's cool to get the kids out of the house and get them more acclimated to this humid weather, because they still haven't really gone outside in the 2.5 years. They do, but not a lot. So I'm going to get them acclimated. We're gonna. I have a big hat, and I've got my big ape hanger, Schwinn, and oh yeah, it's good stuff.
So you're out. Was this a boonie hat or a sombrero, or describe this big hat, because I need to know what that looks like.
Oh, it's the Edelbrock hat that you can buy. It's the big straw hat. I mean, literally, it's probably a foot on either side like this, and it says Edelbrock right on it, and you can kind of see the little burn line right there. Yep.
Who here in the chat wants to see a picture of Polito in the Edelbrock hat with his ape hanger handlebars going down the road on that bike? This needs to be a short,
And it's awesome, man. It's got white wall tires on it and everything, and it's just like driving in my Dart. I get more people going by, give me the thumbs up and hitting their horn, like they're like, dude. I'm like, yeah, that's right, dude.
Yeah. See, Dougster wants to see it. Yes.
Yeah, I'll take some pictures of that. Let's see. Yeah, they beat us to death with handwriting, mechanical drafting. Oh yeah, right.
Yeah.
Let's see. I'm reading through these really quick. Oh yeah. Yes, I was cruising. Looks like we've kind of ran out of books. Anything else you got kind of going on?
Speaking of David Vizard there, he just put out an interesting video on valve timing events, which is kind of his specialty. So I thought it was very interesting. Might be worth a watch. Yeah, he just put that out here a couple days ago.
I'll have to read that.
Yeah, Barrows is saying pictures, video. Right, Colleen wants to see it. I do too. I'd like to see that different look Professor P out in incognito.
Yeah, I got a long sleeve shirt on, and I got that. And sometimes I wear my black sunglasses. These right here. These are my old Oakleys right here.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah, and then cruising around, and then I got my. Now here's the thing. I wear my black and white checkered Vans because they don't have any of the cushion in them, so I can feel the pedals. So yeah, it's really good. It's really good. Yeah.
So Colleen is sent me a message about There's a comment that she posted earlier, and you can weigh in on this. I
Sure.
saw it. Um, their machinist told them that Damien's 8 spun rod bearings were from bolt stretch.
Well, okay, that has happened in over rev situations on stock rods. Now, but you could tell that if you were to take them apart, put them back together, torque them to spec, and then check for rod stretch. So if you have a rod bolt stretch gauge, you can check that. 5 to 5.5 is usually means a newer rod. 6.5 to 7 thousandths of stretch usually means that the rod is on its way out. But you can't just guess that. You would know that because you would be able to check it, and that's what I do when I put them in a rod vise and I torque them down. I'm checking for that, and I'll measure them. I have an A and a B side, but yeah, I don't know. I find that one hard to believe. Usually, if all of them were done, even if you I mean, I've seen them to where people have. That's exactly what I have right there.
There we go. And someone sent me that.
Yes, that's exactly what I have right there as I'm freighting around town. Yeah, and we have all these like little biking paths through this town that I live in, and they're cool, man. They have like they're like these little. One of them's like the old wagon trail that you kind of rolled through, so it's kind of cool. I took a picture of it. So, but getting back to to Damien's rods, I don't buy that personally. Yeah, because you would know. I mean, I would just take it out. I would just say, well, hey, I'm going to test something real quick, and I would put it in a rod vise. I would loosen them up. I would measure the rod, bolt, and there's going to be a section there. I would put the cap on it. Then I would torque it to spec, and then I would remeasure it. And if I got somewhere in the vicinity of 6.5 to 7, well, yeah, the rod bolt's done. But it would let you know before spinning the bearings. What I think either happened is they weren't either torqued correctly, they had too much clearance, or it starved for oil. That's what I would say. All right, Dougster, how do you come back the 5-7 fight in the stand firing order Mopar besides special intake porting, or do you even have 4-step or 2 and 4 fight? Okay.
One thing before we switch over to fire and order, I'll just say on bolt
Sure.
stretch. This is just an in general thing. When I went to
Sure.
trade school, what we were taught as a rough rule of thumb is that your bolt needs to stretch to approximately 90% of its yield point. That's where you're torquing it, to
Yep.
approximately 90% of its yield. 100% of its yield is where it fails. 90% is where you're putting enough stretch on it that it acts like a spring and keeps your fastener clamped.
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about bolt stretch, that's what it's accomplishing. You're stretching it to get the bolt to act like a spring to hold the part together.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So, but if you measure them, most of the ARP bolts are going to be, and any of those rod bolts are going to be 5 to 7 thousandths. It's going to be your stretch, normal 5, just under 6, maybe 6.25 as far as or 6.2 is going to be your stretch. That's going to be your average. Once you get over that 6.5 number, or close to the 7, it's done. It's completely done. Okay, so how do you combat the 5.7 standard firing order in a Mopar besides special intake porting, or do you even a 4.7 swap, then 2.4 fight? Okay, I'm actually doing this right now. Basically, you just do the 4.7-2.3 swap. And a lot of people call it the LS firing order. You can, a lot of people do the 4.7 swap, but the Windsor firing order is what I call it, because that's actually the one that came out with it first, 351 Windsor. What you're doing with that is all it's doing is just combating harmonics. Really, it doesn't make any more power. Really, so many people have tested this. So many people have done that. All you're doing is you're taking the harmonics from one end of the engine to the other end of the engine, and then you're just taking it and smoothing out the harmonics to it. That's why an LS, or even that most people know it as, but that's why a 351 Windsor or a 302 Mustang, remember the 302 Boss type Mustangs, have that certain sound, that what I call the Mustang sound, because they have a special firing order. A lot of people know as the LS firing order sound. And what it's doing is it just cuts down on basic bearing harmonics and wear on the bearings, and that's all it's really doing. I The 5.7 though, I mean the Gen 3 Hemi, it still has the standard 18436.572 firing order. It still works just fine. I in my Gen 3 Hemi, that's going to be my road race one for the Desert Dart. I put a 4723 swap in it just because that thing's going to live above 4,000 RPM on the regular. So that's the only reason why I did it. If it's not going to be up there all the time, is really no point in doing it. If it's going to be something that you're going to be driving around most of the time and every once in a while it's going to be going over 4,000 RPM, there's really no reason to cut down on those harmonics because it's never really going to see them because it's not going to be at that RPM range. I only did it because, like I said, this thing's going to be cone dodging and it's going to be up there quite a bit. So I really wouldn't worry about it too much personally for what we're doing. Really, once you get over 6,500 RPM is where you really start to see issues with the harmonics.
Big Belly Racing is asking if he's going to hear from you soon. I'm assuming he's got something in the queue with Slant Daily Garage at yahoo.com.
I'm looking. I actually did look, and I don't see. I only got Michael Gray sent me one. Oh, and that's about the 8 3/4, and then I got someone about a load spreader today. Other than that, I don't have anything here.
Big
you know
Belly,
what? Send it again.
Yeah.
Send it again because sometimes that it goes to spam in that section, and I have it on a really low risk. See here, I'm going to my spam section real quick. I don't see anything. Oh wait, there's a whole bunch of stuff here. Oh yeah, could be one of these. Okay, I'll have to go through them. There's about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's about 10 different things in my spam thing. I'll have to go through them. So I'm sorry, but try to resend it. And if it didn't, is this right here? You did mention about Micro Mini Star. I mentioned in the last live and see if you'll want some pickups. Yes, just send me another thing real quick, and I'll see if it goes through. If Slant Daily Garage yahoo.com, and I'll see if something pops up, and that way I can look at it real quick. Sorry about that. It's
speaking of mini starters, so Tall Garage in our community, he actually went to the parts store and he got a Dakota mini starter for his engine. And he said there are 3 different flavors of that Dakota mini starter. So yes. I don't know if it's up yet or not, but he did a countertop video comparing the 3.
Yeah. So. There's actually, there's 3, yes. And there's actually a mini one too for a V6. I think it was it was a 94 V6. And that's what I use in all mine because it's actually physically smaller as far as the actual electric motor itself. And then they have different ones that have different terminals where the terminals come out at different spots. And some of them you can just take off. So I just normally take the terminals right off, unscrew them.
I love the sound of the factory Chrysler starter, but it's the size of a washing machine.
Yeah.
So it's just it's not really friendly with headers.
You know, with the wife's car, with the Beaver, I put a mini starter on that. I'm probably going to put a factory starter back on it because I want that whine again because it's all.
I love the sound.
Yeah, I want the wah 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 wah.
When I was a little kid watching Dukes of Hazzard, I can remember what the General Lee sounded like when they started it because it had that full size starter.
Mm-hmm.
Love that sound.
Okay, now Colleen. Okay, so now this changes my answer then a little bit. We can only speculate why it was Demon's first time assembling an engine. He also reused the stock rod bolts. Okay, I'm going to tell you a little secret on the small block Mopar. They have an upside and a bottom side shell. They have a top and a bottom. The first time I assembled one, I did it wrong, and that's probably what happened. Is that he probably put them in wrong. So look at, if you can, take the cap off and then look at the back and it'll say bottom or top and make sure it's in the right spot. Just check that out first before we go any farther. But the stock rod bolts shouldn't have done that, especially if you're making under 400 horse. I mean, those things should survive. I run stock rods all the way up to 450 horse, and I would run some stock rods up to, and now I would take off some of the pad material when they started getting over 500 horse or even like RPMing them. I would take some of that weight off of that pad. But other than that, the stock rod bolts should be fine. And see here. The Windsor goes easy on bearing. We're absolutely 100% correct, and it's noticeable. Like you can actually look at it and go, that's a 1-0 firing order. Calling Michael, it was primed, had 1K mic on it. Okay, well if it had 1,000 miles on it, then it definitely wasn't the rod bearings in the wrong spot because it wouldn't have made it past startup. Then it would have started up and then kind of made some noise and then started smoking itself. All my 3T magnets have used rod bolts. Been over 7K on them a few times. No problem so far. I agree with you. I've done, when I couldn't afford anything. And then when I bought the ARP, they had the Wavelock 2000 bolts. Remember those? You could press out the old rod bolts and put them in. Then I found out that you had to have the rods resized. And that would cost another $200. And I was like, man, I could have got some better rods. And now I'm just stuck with these stock rods with better bolts. And they're still a press-in pin. I was like,
I think Patrick, his comment at 927 there, it looks to me like he is clearly vying to win this. This is going to be the top of the worst oil down trophy.
Oh, okay.
So it looks like he's trying to win it. This is out of Stephen Myrick's engine that exploded spectacularly at Sykeston last year. So
oh yeah,
that's what it sounds like Patrick is going for. He's turning it up for the win.
So Patrick, I don't know. I put really good bearings in the last one, but still reused the rod bolts and piston rings. So I watch it and it breaks in No Name Nationals 23. Yeah, it could happen. Could happen. But with the turbo, it's a lot nicer on the parts because it comes in a little slower. So you can usually get away with a lot more factory stuff with the turbo. If it breaks, I hope it's so it dies in zip. Right? Exactly. All right. Marine and Slant 6 with a chance of cannonballs. Once again, greatest name ever. With rod bolts, you're right. You're trying to listen to the difference between max tensile strength and minimum stress to see if its underload is operational. Underload in operation. Cycles of failure go up as you press stress closer to max BLT strength. Yes, absolutely. He's correct on that. 100%. So, yes, he is absolutely correct. And that's the reason why what he's talking about here is that's why when I do 3 times the torque on that, you'll actually see the stretch go up a little bit because you're polishing it in, you're getting a little bit more, and then you're getting it closer to the top max tensile strength. So yeah. Too late now. He's already had everything machined for a new build. Okay, well, it is about whatever.
But with it making 1,000 miles, the bearings were not upside down.
Yes, exactly. Yes, that is correct. It would have made it 10 minutes, if that. Yeah. Shane's email was about a AMC cam. Okay, let's see here. I'll look for it later. Yeah. Did you send it to the yahoo.com? I'm pretty sure it did.
Slantdailygarage@yahoo.com.
Yeah, slantdailygarage@yahoo.com.
There. This
rod balancing question.
Yeah.
Working on a hot flathead inline Plymouth, rods don't have balance pads. Big does, and small end balancing matter on an inline. If not, can I reduce piston weight for the bob weight? Okay, so here's what I do on these is that on the Slant 6 they have a little bit of pad, but it's a press pin. So what I do is I will balance all the I will measure all the rods and I'll write down the little end and the big end weight. Then I'll measure all the pistons and pins and so on and so forth. And then I just mix and match them so they come really close. And then I cut down the piston end so that way it takes the difference up. So like if I need like say 10 grams or whatever it is, that's a significant amount. But if it's 10 grams, I'll just cut that off on the piston so that way I'm not having to take it off on the little end. And then on the big end, there's usually a pad. And, don't get too crazy with an inline because, you can get within a gram or so on those. And that's getting it really tight. But yeah, you can reduce weight for a combo if you can. Yeah, but I really wouldn't go crazy on it. But just put it together, and then that way you can cut down some of the aluminum on the piston side, on the piston itself. And that's how I do my Slant 6s because I got to press them together. And then sometimes I notice when I pressed them in, it would change some of the weight a little bit. So I would just get them close, just go that direction. And bought ARP bolts. Okay, good. If you bought ARP bolts on stock rods, I will tell you that you're going to have the big end resized 100% because it's going to have a tighter stretch on it. And if you don't, what's going to happen is that your bearing crush is going to be different. It's going to run it too tight in the center, and then the fallout's going to be too far. So instead of having a thou difference, you could have almost 2 thou difference, and then you could end up hitting the bearing and it would eat it up.
This is the McRobb Mini Starter, by the way, and you can clock it 360 degrees.
Oh, okay.
Get Illinois out of the way. Weighs 8.5 pounds and makes a lot of power.
Nice.
So there you go. That's what he's talking about.
Gotcha. I sent it a while back in Slant Daily here. Okay. There was a time there when I was going through some personal issues where I just didn't even read any of that stuff. And when the wife came home, we kind of went through them. So it could be in that. I will go back through it, Big Belly, and I will look for it. Okay. So I apologize about that. But there was a lot that kind of came in, and there was a time there where a month I didn't even look at anything other than just surviving. Okay, she's saying it's done. Okay, I'll Shane and John. Let's see here. Boom. Anyone else? I just got home. Well, Wendy English, thank you for joining us.
Glad your work day is over, Wendy.
Yeah, that's a long work day.
Look at Dust Devil there.
You guys got me wanting to build a 904 now. The car move under its own power.
I'm telling you. So I don't know if I can dig this up. I have a live I did a while back. Actually, it would have been March 2nd or something from John Cope. John Cope is not a 904 guy just because he likes everything to be just super overbuilt, ready for, 8 million pounds of torque, right?
Yeah.
So he's into 727 and the 46 RH, 48 RE stuff. So he jokingly calls me the 904 king because I really like the 904.
Me too.
So just saying, if you want a good chuckle, you can dig up that thumbnail.
Okay.
But I like the 904.
And here's the thing too, is that because I never really had anything that was really, really, really fast. When I say really fast, to me, something that runs 6s in the 8th mile is not really a super fast car. That's a decently fast car, but it's not really fast considering where I grew up at.
Right.
So a 904 could handle that all day long in a car that weighs under 3,200 pounds, and I didn't need to build as much power to make the 904 turn. That's the only reason why I went with it. Plus, I didn't have a lot of torque. Most of my stuff was small block, so I could get a 277 first gear, 154 second, and I could put it in there, and I could make up the lack of the gear, and then I would spread out the ratio a little bit and rely on the converter a little bit more, and it would run a little better. So that was my thinking behind it, and it seemed to work, and it still works. Cookie Monster's got a 277 first in it, and it's got a 410, I think, in gear in it right now. And I did that so I didn't have to run a 430 in it, and it hits really hard, so it runs good.
So here's a Cope original.
Nice. That's good. That's good.
I'll take the label. I like those things.
Yeah, right.
Patrick, if there ever is a 904 Mafia,
right.
I'm all about it.
Right. Can you over-octane a street engine by adding too much? Absolutely. 100%. If you're in, because all octane is not, it doesn't burn slower, it doesn't do anything like, it's just how prone to detonation it is. And if you don't have the compression to run it, it's not going to make any more power. No. Now, when we're talking about gasoline, E85 is a whole different deal. But if the engine is like, say, a 9.5 to 1, right? Let's just say, or 9 to 1. 87 is probably going to make its best power on 87 octane than it would, say, maybe even 91. It would probably make about the same. And you couldn't change really the timing because the timing is just going to be cylinder pressure, and you're going to make the maximum amount of cylinder pressure regardless. 110 and C116, you might make even less power because it's not going to be at its full potential at that point. It's just not going to be near what it needs to be for prone detonation. I think the Q116 is the only way that you would actually make more power, but you might have to change the timing for that because it's oxygenated. So that's the only one. And then E85 is just a whole different animal altogether because you're cooling the intake charge with as much fuel as you can, and then you're going to be changing timing ratio and whatnot. And you change the cylinder pressure in the combustion chamber at a different time. It's a whole different deal. But yes, you can absolutely over octane an engine 100% because you will actually slow it down, and you won't gain anything from it. Remember, there used to be these companies, Nitro or what was it? NOS. I think it was NOS. Remember, it was power in a can, right? You used to put it in, we'll make X amount of more foot-pounds of torque. It's all garbage. It was all garbage because none of that's really going to make anything unless the car needs more octane, so that way you're not detonating, or you can actually not retarding the timing. The only way you can do it is if the car is optimally tuned on 87, putting 110 in it could slow it down. It more than likely will slow it down.
But bear in mind, all of these things that advertise it's worth this much power and all of that, they're advertising you a return without even knowing what you're already running. So do a logic check on that before you buy anything.
Yeah, right, exactly. Shane, how's the fuel injection experiment you were working on? Promise or carbs for life? Well, here's the thing, is that with the throttle body fuel injection, it is a bust. Why shouldn't I say it was a bust? It was a great learning tool because you're just taking, now on a slant 6, it's got a funny intake because it's got long runners, it's hanging off the side, they're all unequal length. So for that, the carburetor seemed to work the best. In fact, I know it does. I'm still going to be running the VRS on it, and we're going to see what that does. But the fuel injection, though, is not completely over because I'm going to have the multi-port fuel injection going on it. So that's where I'm going to be injecting it right at the valve. So that way I take all the runner length out of the equation as far as fuel pooling and whatnot. And I think what's happening with the fuel injection is because it's injecting it and how the slant 6 works, and it's such a crappy intake system. I think it's puddling the fuel, and that's why I was getting so just odd numbers all over the place. And it finally worked itself out, but the 600 Edelbrock so far right now is the king as far as mileage and eighth mile times. The Holley 350 and the fuel injection are about the same on par as far as mileage and as far as time. But the Holley is way easier to drive. You can basically put that on there and you don't, at the track, and you can just flat foot it and take off. Where the 4-barrel, you have to kind of roll into it and you have to know how to drive it because there's really no vacuum. Plus, we're dealing with 276 gears. So that might all change. This whole thing might change when I go to a 355 gear and an A500 transmission, which is going to be happening soon. That's why I'm keeping all this stuff, because I'm going to do the same experiment again, but with a different tranny, different gear setup, just to see if loading it is different. So I hope that answers your question. Trying to clean out carbon. Yes, absolutely. It's called an Italian tune-up. I do it all the time on the wife's car. Whenever it starts acting funny, I just take it out into the freeway and I floor it, and I just hold it floored, and usually drives better after that. So, oh yeah, here's Dallas 104 octane boost. That's exactly what it was called. Yep, that's right, Dallas. That's exactly what it was called. Rainsland 6 with a chance of cannonballs. I was just looking to see if anybody here in this community whom I'm inclined to trust rather than anonymous reviewers had tried or knew about the McRob story before I plunked down the cash. I personally have never tried one of those personally. And is this going to be putting it on a slant 6? Is that what he's going to be putting it on?
I've never run one either. What I will say, at least about this community, is it has a little bit more accountability than other internet communities.
Yep.
Because we do see each other, So
Yeah.
I will say that. So if you do find somebody in this community that's running, report back. I have no experience. I am not that exotic. I'm actually more or less a caveman with a lot of stuff.
Me too. And here's the way I've always done something. If I can't go to the parts store and buy it, if I'm driving the car, then I'm not going to run it usually. There's very few occasions that I'll run something, but I try to buy everything to where I could just go to any auto parts store and just pick up whatever I need.
Well,
And I just keep a
I'm
list of it.
okay. So there's nothing wrong with running any kind of starter you want, and if you have to, like the solenoid's in a place where it has to be for your headers or something, that's one thing. But it's nice to be able to put a factory part like a Dakota starter on it. So if there is a factory part number readily available at a parts store, you can get to replace it if you have to. You're okay to run that starter, but you're still ahead if there's something else you can put on if you get stranded. So,
Yes.
and I don't think he'd at all mind me telling this, but Lunar Outlaw Garage, he had a brake caliper problem right before Power Tour, and the problem he's having is some kind of pin that goes there. It's a common problem, but these calipers were designed for Mercedes, and they're kind of exotic, and they stop well, but when you need parts, you can't get them for a week and that kind of stuff. So,
Mm.
to me, one thing I like is to know I can get parts next day if I have to do it. So even if I'm
Yeah.
running something exotic, as long as the replacement piece, like if I was running an exotic distributor of some kind, like Andy Wood does, right? At least my spare will drop in and go. I try not to
Mm.
build things so that they depend on weird exotic custom stuff as little as possible.
Yeah. And it's funny you say that because for that exact reason, the Desert Dart, I got 12.19 rotors front and rear.
Hmm.
So they run the exact same rotor. So there's no difference. So there's no difference between front and rear rotor, the same rotor. So when I'm at the track racing, if I have a problem, I have extra rotors. So yeah. Right here, it says I was laughed at by VP Distributor when I said I wanted the highest octane fuel for my annual vintage drag race event. Yeah. Well, it depends though on your engine setup, right? I mean, that's really what it comes down to. Dust, but the smell of the gas smells so good,
Yeah,
right? Right? Yeah, I agree
it
with that
is.
one.
It is.
Also, Rain and Slant 6 with a chance of cannonballs. Shane and John, have either of you been checking out the Carl, who's that,
Charlie Servito.
Servitos? YouTube vids on his porting and flowing his 318 Mission Impossible Project Carb yet? No, I have not.
Nope.
Mm-mm. I have not.
Colleen,
Oh,
Colleen, go ahead.
I was going to say, yeah. I was going to say right here. Go ahead.
I was going to say Colleen loves her seafoam down the car. What do you think of that? What do you think about the seafoam deal? Because seafoam is something you can ask 10 people and get 10 answers. So
Yeah.
I don't think you and I've ever had a seafoam discussion. I'm kind of curious.
I've never used it. I've never needed to.
Either. I take that back. So in the mower shop, they are big on it in the mower shop for whatever reason.
Yeah, no, I learned that distilled water works the best. And where I lived at, where I grew up at, we had hills, like mountains, like not hills like here, but we actually had mountains. And we would just run a line into the car, and we had a little valve on it, and we would just get a gallon of distilled water. We'd start running up the hill, and then we would floor the car, and then turn the valve on till the car stopped accelerating, and then you would just run it up the hill until it sucked out the water. And then you would drive it back. You would change the plugs because the plugs would essentially be black at that point because all the carbon. And you would look down in there, and it would be just like having a head gasket leak. It'd be a totally clean piston, totally clean combustion chamber. Everything was good, and all that steam would just blow everything right off of it. So that's what I've done. And you do not do that. Don't do this. I'm going to repeat. Don't do this if you have a catalytic converter.
Just
'Cause
thinking
it will eat it up. It will just
yes.
annihilate it and clog it right up because everything that was on that piston now is in that cat and it will eat it. Tech Wednesday, John Shane, I found you tonight. Is one off Tech Win? Wait, my phone, my computer keeps messing up here. I can't read this here. I got lines through it. Is this a one-off Tech?
Right.
Either way, thanks. There's a line going through it. Thanks, guys, for having it. I'm glad.
So he's asking if this is a one-off Tech Wednesday. He's glad he found us. But so I'm the interim guest host. Dallas is on hiatus. He's joined us in the chat tonight, but that's just what I'm doing. Is I'm just here to be Ed McMahon for Polito, in the interim, and I'm enjoying it thoroughly. I love getting any opportunity to interact with you guys and talk tech. So.
Yeah, no. Dallas and I, we used to do this on the AHRA every Wednesday night. We did it for, I think we're coming up on a year, and then we were kind of going through some personal issues, and then Dallas just went on a little hiatus. So I kept the spot open by just bringing it to my page, and John was nice enough to come in and sit with us and talk cars. So that's really it is. But yeah, for right now, we're just going to be doing it here from 7 to 9. So yeah. And if there's questions you don't feel like answering here, you can always send it to me, slantdailygarage@yahoo.com. Once again, slantdailygarage@yahoo.com. And I'll get to them. And they're coming in. I got about 5 right now that just came in.
Also, if you see any tech stuff done around YouTube, like you see technical stuff, I mean, it would be an interesting topic. I mean, I'm not speaking for Professor P and it's his channel. I mean, I don't want to disparage any channel or anything anyone's doing, but I would like to engage in the tech we see people doing.
Yes.
Sometimes the methods and these kind of things. Because there's a lot. Sometimes people really invent something cool, and sometimes their compass is pointing so far south it's not even funny. But those could make good, valuable tech topics.
Also, too, I want to see if it's bullshit or not. I'm just going to say it like it is. You know, some people say this works, this did that, and maybe I've already tried it, and I shouldn't use the word bullshit, but I'm just going to say, well, I've had mixed results, but it would be good. And as far as the seafoam, I did have a friend who swore by it, just swore by it. And what he would do is he would get that thing nice and hot, and he would run seafoam through the carburetor. And then he would pour it down the carburetor until the thing would like basically choke out or whatever. And then you would like hear it sizzle inside the engine. And then you would start it back up, and then it would smoke and whole smoke show. And he swore it was cleaning things out. I have a bore scope. I just look down the spark plug holes and I've tried. The only thing I didn't tell the truth on here is that I have tried it on single cylinder lawnmower engines, and it didn't do a damn bit difference on that. But that's a Briggs and Stratton deal, so I didn't see any difference on it. So,
well, so Polito and I actually have a term for this. We call it sorcery. Okay. So if you see any automotive sorcery, we would love to take a look at it and engage it. And you know, sometimes people come up with something new. Sometimes they don't.
Yeah, and there's a wizard out there, a king wizard, that we have, and so it would be just we would like to see some of the wizardry. That'd be awesome. That'd be good stuff.
Remember, for you who are old enough in the chat to remember this, remember when the J.C. Whitney catalog was the thing? Yes. And all of that ridiculousness that was in there? Okay, we don't see that anymore. But believe me, that mentality still exists all over the internet. There's all kinds of that still out there. So they could be interesting tech topics. And the way that I would think might be a good way, of course, this is Professor P. You tell me what you think. It'd be nice to talk about that and then talk about legitimate science that should be talked about instead of that.
Agreed. That was actually my go. That's actually what I was thinking about it with it last week. Yeah. If anyone you guys who are still on here watching, see a video that you're questionable about, send it to me or John, slantdailygarage@yahoo.com. John, what's your email?
Princeton Dragway.
There you go. Princeton Dragway.
John at PrincetonDragway.com.
Yeah, send it to either one of us, and we'll bring it up here, and then we'll kind of critique it. Try to get it to us, obviously, maybe a day or so before, so we can do our due diligence on going over it, and that way I can get a good laugh for a couple days first, So, lighten up my day,
Sometimes when there's something that has a really specific angle to it, like let's say it's way out on the peninsula of, say, transmission knowledge. We got other people in the community like John Cope who could weigh in. Or let's say it's way out on the point in this topic or that topic. We know other people who specialize in stuff too, and we can bring them in on the fun. I mean, it's all about learning and having fun together. We can do that.
Here's one. You mentioned something about transmission. For years when I was a kid, I'd always hear people say they would put sawdust in the transmission to make it shift smoother. Remember that one?
Yeah,
Everyone said that same thing. And I as I got older, I was like, did that really work? And then I looked at it and I'm like, no, it can't work because it's just going to clog the filter. It would actually just clog the whole transmission. It wouldn't work. The valves wouldn't work. The pump wouldn't work. It just
What
wouldn't
about a
do anything.
manual?
Huh?
What about a manual transmission when it's grinding? Because let's say the forks are worn out, your brass synchros are worn out, the
That
dog
could
tools are
be.
all chewed off. Maybe the sawdust buffers that. I don't know. I've never tried it, but
That could be. That maybe is what it's for. Is for the manual. It could be for that. I don't know.
I've heard of that in rear ends too. Because they can get so worn out that you got a bunch of backlash in there, and the sawdust, you're basically chewing through sawdust with the gear teeth to cushion them.
Yeah. See, I've never heard those two. I've always heard it in like an automatic transmission, but those two, I could see how it would work.
And on the rear end, if you want an early example of that, the Andy Griffith Show, Barney buys a car, and I won't spoil it for you, but if you're a car person, whether you like Andy Griffith or not, okay, I know I'm a Southerner, so I do. But whether you like the Andy Griffith style of humor or not, if you're a car person, you want to watch the episode Barney's First Car.
Okay.
Because some of these things you can see have been around a long time.
Schmidt says, "Hi, I've been collecting vintage super high horsepower spark plugs from the 50s that sent more power." Wow. Yeah. I remember one year when I was a parts jockey, we went around and all the different ones that said, this one will give you 5 more horsepower. This one will give you 10 more horsepower. And then we just took a small block Chevrolet that made 250 horse. All the percentages, you could gain 100 horsepower by just buying all the little massage oils and all the little spark plugs that they said would do it. No, it wouldn't do it. Patrick says it correctly. Sorcery equals it doesn't work.
we call it sorcery. There's a lot of it still out there.
What are your opinions, pros or cons, on external versus internal balance? Okay, this is really good for me because I'm 360 to 318. External balance, really super simple, and it's really easy if you're running stock components. You're keeping it within the stock RPM range, say 5,500, or just call it 6,000. 6,000 under, you'll be fine. It works great. They ran them like that for years. Internally balanced, I like internally balanced when I'm going to be making something that makes a little bit more RPM or a little bit more horsepower. That way I can control it. Do I want it overbalanced? Do I want it underbalanced as far as how percentage? Where's the RPM range going to be? And then it's going to be a little bit more expensive because then you're going to have to sometimes put some Mallory metal. If the engine was designed for external balance and you're going to make it internally balanced, you're going to have to buy Mallory. It's going to be a little more expensive. But that's basically your pros and cons. That's the simplest, easiest pros and cons right there. What's yours?
You know what? I have never been that sophisticated about it because I just want to make sure that I get the converter and flex plate and everything to match and to work right.
Yeah.
I have never worried about. I've never had stuff that made enough power to have to worry about it.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
exactly.
that's just the stone cold honest answer because everybody wants to think that their stuff is just such liquid dynamite in a case that they have to worry about these things. But most of the time, no. And so I've never worried about stuff that's just not that applicable to me like that. So
yeah, I would say 550 horsepower and 6,000 RPM and above. Internally balance it because then you're going to need the RPM and the smoothness. You're not going to beat the bearings out of it.
If I'm gonna tell you, I kind of like the idea of internal balance on principle.
Yes.
Because external just seems weird to me. External to me, I know it just sounds like a crazy right brain thing. See, I'm not an engineer like Polito. I took engineering classes, but I didn't go like full whole hog like Polito here. To me, external balance is like somebody didn't get it right, so they scabbed weight on to make the washing machine quit dancing across the floor. That's just what it has always seemed like to me. I know that's not true, but that's always what it seemed like to me. So it kind of weirds me out a little, but I don't worry about it. Really, I don't.
All the internal balance doing is that you're taking the external balance weight and just moving it closer in. So you're just taking the outside weights, putting it on the end. So that's all really it is. But because it's so much farther out from the center line, that's where things get into different harmonics and vibrations, and as far as RPM. So, anyways, moving on. Aaron asks, did STB do anything? Yes, it thickened your oil. There you go. It did. Did Slick 50 do anything? Yes, it made millions of dollars selling people basically Teflon inside of synthetic while it was suspended, which means that you would have to get it to about 1,500 degrees before it would adhere to anything. So it just made millions and millions and millions of dollars. It didn't really do anything. It was Slick 50 was just synthetic oil with Teflon inside of it. That's all it was.
Well, the Slick 50 commercials, were those the guys or Prolong, or who used the Slant 6 engines for their torture tests with sand in them and all that?
I think that was Prolong.
Was it Prolong? Okay.
I think it was Prolong. That was the one where they cut the hose and it was shooting out water, and then they had a hose and they were taking scoops of dirt. And I remember being like overwhelmed, like, oh my God, that's so awesome. But then as I got older, I'm like, that's a Slant 6. Big deal.
Here's something to just think about. Again, I know there's a lot of advancement in technology and lubricants and things like that. I get that, okay? But if any of these guys that come out with this, it always seems like there's a number of years where they ramp up their marketing, they make their money, and you never hear from them again. If they really revolutionize petroleum, don't you think that people would be running them today? Don't you think they would be selling, engine oil with their stuff in it? Don't you think they would have contracts with teams? Mm-hmm. Don't you think they'd be taking up space on the parts store shelves? And it just seems like they never do. They're there for a certain number of years, they make their money, and you don't see them anymore.
Yeah. And here's one that I didn't think of while I was saying it. Dick says that internal balance equals better availability on balances, converters, and flex plates. Absolutely correct. Yeah, that's the biggest thing, because that way you don't have to get the weights correct. Especially on a Ford. I mean, you have 3 different weights that are available for an externally balanced small block Ford. So when I design some of the flex plates, I have to put a little spot in there so that way you can put different weights on it for different externally balanced. So yes, he is correct. And once again, this is a live show, so a lot of the stuff we just can't think of on the fly as we go.
Right.
So,
it's
yeah. Oh, and here, yes, he did say STB also had more zinc in the snake oil. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, more zinc, more phosphorus, more any of that stuff. So yeah. I remember being a naive teen reading that in Car Mags too, thinking that you just bolt on the few aftermarket goodies to my engine and it's going to make 500 horsepower, till called Mopar Tech and Larry Shepard put me wise. Yes, exactly.
And you were not a young guy there at Raining Slant 6.
Right. The one thing that I really liked about the Mopar thing is I have the Bible, and I've said this before, is that they would say inside there, like, you have a 318 or a small block and you want to run 13 seconds, buy these parts, set your timing here, put this carburetor on here, set it here. I mean, it was just awesome. So
they had recipes, and
it was a recipe. There you go. Yes.
The recipe was, though, is every time you went 1 second quicker, they didn't just have upgrades. They had you change all kinds of stuff. Like, no, it was very inefficient, though.
Yes.
But they had recipes. So if you knew you wanted to run a certain speed and stay there forever with your investment, you could do the recipe.
That's right. But you know what? Funny is that I just got a little lick here, and it shows that it's 9:02. Man, wow! It's already been 2 hours.
Time flies. We've had a great crowd tonight. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, good crowd. It was good fun. And if we didn't get to something that you guys want, once again, slantdailygarage@yahoo.com, or you can email John, Prince.
John at PrincetonDragway.com.
Yeah, John at PrinceDragway.com. And either one of us will get to it, but please send some videos, some snake oil videos or whatever, or questions like, did this work or did that work or whatever, and this and that. I'll tell you right now, man, I've tried some of these things, and I'll tell you if they work or not. And I'll be honest with you. And then, or if not, we'll just get a good laugh at it. I'll figure out how to put a video up here so we can watch the video and just critique it. I'll figure that out by next week, so. Anything else you want to plug, John?
No, I think that's it. I'll be live on Friday, regular time, and I look forward to seeing any of you guys that show up on Friday. And it's been fun. Been a good evening.
Yeah, been fun. Thanks again, John, for showing up, and thank you guys for coming in. And right now, same bat time, same bat channel next week, and we'll be here. So until then, thanks guys for stopping by, and you guys have a good week.
See ya.
Take it easy.